All right, what's up, my dude?
Hey,
Hey,
it's
what's up?
nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too, buddy. All right, what do you got for me?
Okay, so I'm an anthro major
Uh-huh.
in undergrad right now,
Okay.
which isn't that much of an accomplishment, but I'm hoping to major and get my degree in biological anthropology. But
Gotcha.
in my cultural anthropology class, what we talked about was how you really shouldn't call female genital mutilation mutilation. You should just call it cutting. And
Why
I
is that?
think you would agree with this if you follow what I'm gonna say.
Okay, hit me up.
Okay, so basically, why you shouldn't call it mutilation is essentially because what do you have in mind where mutilation is a good thing?
It's not.
Yeah. So by calling it mutilation right off the bat, you're already telling them that what they're doing is bad.
Yeah, that's the whole
Which,
point, right?
yeah, right. But what you're supposed to look at from an anthropological point of view is if you're looking at another culture and what they're doing with their culture, you can't assign any sort of, context that would be perceived negatively to their culture. So by
If we were
calling,
talking at something like historically or anthropologically, sure.
yeah, that's my whole point. That's
Yeah,
why
but
I
I'm not
said you would
generally
probably agree
doing
with
it.
me.
Usually, when I refer to FGM, usually it's in the context of talking about male genital mutilation as well, circumcision, right?
Right. And I think the United States, no. What country? Not the United States. There's a Euro country that just banned circumcision.
I want to say Sweden, but I don't remember. But I know that, yeah,
Yeah.
somebody brought it up.
Yeah. So I don't know why, because that's another question is that how come male genital mutilation in this case
Uh-huh.
is, allowed in the United States and female genital mutilation isn't? And I know that's like a big red flag is like, wow, of course it's not. You're cutting off the clitoris of the
Well, no,
vagina.
I mean, I
That's
call
not.
them both the same thing. I mean, I refer to circumcision as mutilation as well.
Yeah. And I mean, but do you believe circumcision should be banned as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Why?
generally well, because I have beliefs about respecting the autonomy of people, and when it comes to children, making permanent changes to them requires a great justification. So, for instance, I think vaccinations are adequately justified. I mean, we can go into, I guess, whether or not it's justified or not. That's a kind of a side conversation. But I don't believe that mutilating somebody's genitals is justified, generally.
Right.
Obviously, if there are like exceedingly rare circumstances where it's required, but
Okay. I can get that. Uh I brought this up in the in the subreddit,
mm-hmm.
and everyone on the subreddit is very retarded.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily that. I mean, if you're studying anthropology, I mean, the onus is on you to understand why they would respond that way, right?
Right.
It would
And,
kind of
and
be
I
like
could see.
saying, it would be like saying, if there was a culture in the past and their culture involved maybe gang raping 9-year-old boys, but they called it like the young boy ceremony. I think
Right.
that conventionally speaking, most people would probably refer to it as like the gang rape that they used to do with boys in the past, right? Typically,
Right.
people in current societies will ascribe their current moral systems onto past societies and judge them by their current moral system, right?
Got it.
So I
Okay.
mean, like
So
that.
maybe
So that's
not.
pretty understandable. I mean, it's
I guess.
talking in like a strictly historical sense. I mean, you're correct. It doesn't make sense strictly historically to prescribe our morals onto past people. It doesn't really make much sense. But I mean,
I get.
yeah, go ahead.
I guess I should call them not retarded, but uninformed on anthropology, because everyone on the subreddit was, thinking that I'm arguing for,
Keep
female
up the
genital
great work.
mutilation, and that's obviously I'm not, a big proponent of, cutting off the clitoris or sealing up the vagina or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just I don't know.
I mean, like
I don't know
words
what.
are. I mean, like the thing is that like it's very strange that you're confused by this. If you seem to understand the cultures of the past, you should understand the culture of the present, right? Like, obviously people are going to act in this way because if somebody steps into a thread and they're going to great lengths to defend the use or to ban the use of a certain word, then you have to start ascribing motivations to that person. And the most obvious one is that this person doesn't think that this sort of genital mutilation is wrong. That would be the first thing I would think of. Now you can argue, well, no, in an anthropological context, this makes more sense, but most people aren't having anthropological conversations, right?
Right.
So, I mean, like, generally, mutilation is something that occurs today still in different countries. And I think that most people, because we live in a pretty globalized society, right, due to the internet and whatnot, I think that we tend to share our values across the globe, even if people don't necessarily say we do. This is, for instance, why we'll look at some countries and say, you know, what they do with their work culture in Japan is wrong. And it's like, okay, well, can you really say that as a Westerner looking at an Eastern country? Or we might say that the way that Muslim women are treated in certain countries is wrong. And it's like, well, not really, depending on, you know, the particular flavor of Islam or whatever shit they're following. It's not really wrong. But that's not how people have these conversations in today's day and age. In the globalized society that we live in, we tend to project our moral systems onto every other person, and every other person seems to project their moral system on everybody else. It seems to be the way things go, right?
Right. Sorry, I guess I was feeling attacked on the subreddit, but what you're saying makes sense. And I think I got a comment on the subreddit thread that basically says what you're saying.
Sure.
It's like, why would you bring this up on the subreddit? Like,
yeah. If there were people that were engaging in an anthropological conversation where they were describing things,
to bring up. Yeah.
Then in that case, I could understand, like, oh yeah, like FJM is a morally loaded term. It doesn't really make sense to judge a past society by today's morals, and it's not really an accurate way of, because they wouldn't have seen it as that, right? They're not seeing it as mutilating, you know. But when we're talking today in the present tense, I mean, that is how we describe it, right?
Yeah, man, I had all these notes. Set up, like how you were gonna say no, it's mutilation no matter what way you look at it. I was gonna talk about like how it's the emic and the etic perspectives. Do you know what emic and etic are in anthropology?
Nope.
Emic and etic. Emic is like what they think. It's like if you're reading something and it's written from, you know, firsthand perspective, that's the emic. The etic is what the anthropologist sees. So with the emic, what they would think in the, like what their culture would think is that, oh, it's a you know, rite of passage. It's just normal. Mm-hmm. You do this when you're transferring, you know, you're becoming a woman. And the etic would be, this is like the controlling of the female sexuality. It's the denying them of pleasure and so on and so forth. So I just think that's also important when you're thinking of calling it mutilation or cutting. Because I think the UN, they were talking about this in the UN and trying to like say, oh, you can't do this to people. But I think they came to a conclusion that you have to call it cutting and not mutilation in the national sense, I guess.
Is that actually true?
My professor brought it up. I'm looking it up right now.
So this was supposedly, I don't know when you took this class, trying to find the date this article was posted, but right now there is, on the United Nations website, I see the International Day of Zero Tolerance for Female Genital Mutilation.
Okay, I'm at that too.
And they're very clearly using FJM or FGM to describe this, so... FGM Maybe. Is still used. I see it on the WHO site as well. That was an article posted this year about 9 months ago.
Interesting. So I guess what my professor was telling me was wrong?
Well, not only does it sound wrong, it also like sounds like actually wrong. Like it would be incorrect for the UN to do this, because the UN today should not be respecting other cultures in this sense. It should be prescribing some sort of moral values to other cultures. That's the entire point of the UN. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's way too broad. I shouldn't say that. But that's one of the purposes of the UN, is to bring other sites morally in line with, or other countries or states, I guess, morally in line with other states, right?
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, like, if there was some place that had a practice called holy servitude or something, and it was where like all black people had a duty in society to be slaves to, white people, I don't think the UN would say, well, we shouldn't call that slavery. We should respect their terminology and call it holy servitude. They would probably just call it slavery and say that we need to end it, right? Or if there was a practice related to sex trafficking, they would just call it sex trafficking. They wouldn't use whatever nice phrase, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here about the cutting or the mutilation thing.
Sure.
But in order to bring these people to like the table to even talk about saying, like in the UN sense, to try and saying, hey, stop doing this, how should they go about it?
Holy shit, I have no fucking idea. That's like an intersectional, that's like a 50 million different answers. There is no just one way to do it. I mean, people from outside organizations can come in and do like teaching and education for women that are going to have children to get them to not do it to their daughters. Access to the economic change, so things that give people access to media from across the world, where they see that that's not normalized and they're exposed to that sorts of media. You can get a lot of secularization there that discourages that stuff. People, outside groups coming in and protesting it directly. Documentaries or stories that highlight women that have endured these kinds of practices and then the side effects that happen therein. Medical training that's sponsored by outside organizations that comes in and gets people to stop performing. So, I mean, there's probably like 50 trillion different ways that you can combat a problem like this.
Yeah, I get that. But do you think calling it cutting instead of mutilation would make a difference?
I don't have data to answer that. I'm not sure. I just don't know. I'm not trying to be difficult. I really don't know. I understand the point that you're trying to make is that if you're more generous towards somebody's point of view, you can get them on your side more, but I'm not sure. I just don't know the answer to that. It feels like that the answer one way or another. But my worry would be that calling it cutting as opposed to FGM would do more harm than good, because anybody that hears of the practice is going to think not as poorly of it. Like you said, right? Like because language can be prescriptive, right? If somebody says FGM, immediately you have a bad thing in your head, even if you don't know about the practice. And I think globally, most of us agree that it is a bad practice, so we would want to call it something that conveys it that immediately. Whereas there might be a bunch of people that think of cutting as like, oh, it's just cutting, and then you have to tell them like, well, wait, that's actually bad. I'm like, oh, I didn't know it was bad. Like, so that might do more harm than good for worldwide awareness about it.
Okay. I think we're moving away from anthropology, but yeah, I believe.
Well, yeah, that's the whole point, was that these aren't anthropological discussions. These are like current day philosophical and political discussions, right?
Well, I would think that, would you not say that's part of their culture? I mean, where is female genital mutilation done outside of, the cultural realm? It's not done like as a recreational type thing, or it's not done, right when the baby's born.
Yeah, sure. So we can back up and ask a different question, because we're kind of circling around a more fundamental question. Does one culture have the right to tell another culture that their practices are bad? That's the real question that's being asked here, right?
Right.
And it sounds like you're feeling like the answer to that is no?
Right.
Gotcha.
Because I think if you're like basically calling it mutilation you're kind of like, again, you're assigning sort of, what you're doing is bad, and therefore you are bad. Like, that's a bad thing. Why are you doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so my whole thing is like, that's a kind of a slippery slope when you call what people do, like when you think that.
So I understand what you're saying, but the thing is that like we just live in a different world today where our society is so globalized that it would be hard to tolerate certain types of ideas from different cultures, because we're all kind of intermingling now. Like, everybody exists on the world stage, everybody shares entertainment, everybody's connected to each other on the internet. If there are certain groups of people that are part of this globalized society that have these kind of like horrible practices, you would probably be compelled to condemn it and call it out. And this is ignoring the normal moral obligations that a lot of people feel they have. Like, a lot of people feel like just, they just by virtue of existence that they have moral obligations to not stand for this type of treatment. A lot of people would say, I don't accept slavery or sexual trafficking in other countries just because it's another culture. Like, I think that's just a wrong that should be corrected anywhere. So, but we're not even getting into that. I think you can argue from a self-interested perspective, hey, we live in a globalized society today. All of our cultures are intermingling. I don't want these toxic aspects of other cultures to be accepted anywhere, because I don't want them to be accepted here at some point, right?
Okay. Yeah. But I'm just having trouble with, because like, what do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line at saying, because there's a culture in the middle of Brazil, the Yanomamo tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And the Yanomamo tribe, they think that everyone else is subhuman other than them.
Okay.
And where would you say, like, compared to the Yanomamo?
The line is the power of who has the power to enforce the culture. Right now, that's the Western world. The United States and its allies.
Okay.
Is who enforces the culture, is whoever is the most powerful person. That's just a fact of life. I can't argue whether or not it's right or wrong, but I mean, that's just how it goes, right? That was the whole point of the events following the World War II, was the fight for a global influence between the East between Russia and communism, I guess, and the United States and her allies. And we seem to have come out on top of that. So now the prerogative is ours to enforce our culture around the world.
Okay. Yeah, I see that now. All right. Well, I just wanted to talk to you about some anthropology memes.
Sure. All right. Well, hey, thanks for the conversation, buddy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Peace out.